What you guys, got another video here for you. This is another build video for you guys who enjoy PC build videos. So let's go through some of the parts we're going to be using in this build. So first off, we have got the ZOTAC gaming. This is a GeForce RTX 3070. This is a white edition. Picked this up not long ago, around about £800, which is absolutely ridiculous. But if you need a graphics card, you've got to pay the money. That's the way it is at the moment. So moving on to the next item, which is our RAM. We've gone for some white RAM here. This is 3600 megahertz speed. Next up, we've got the RAM. This is from V-Color. I've never used V-Color or heard of V-Color before, but I do like the white color that they've got here. And I do like the RGB accents on the top. And I just like the overall look of this RAM. It's 3600 megahertz, 16 gigabyte kit. So I'll be using that in this build. Next up, we've got the CPU, which is a Ryzen 5 5600X. This will be plenty powerful enough for all your gaming needs and also any sort of video editing that you want to do. These CPUs are pretty powerful and they're pretty affordable. So this is a sort of mid-range CPU. For the cooling, we've gone for the Thermaltake TH240. This is an ARGB Sync Snow White Edition all-in-one cooler. Pretty decent cooler here. And I do like the overall look of it. Again, it's white, so it should fit in with our white theme. It does come with two RGB fans on here, and it should support addressable RGB on our motherboard. As you can see down the bottom there, it comes with different types of support for different motherboards. Now for the motherboard, we've gone for the Asrock B550M Steel Legend. This is a micro ATX motherboard. It does support Ryzen 5000 CPUs. So this is going to be great for our build. It does also have some white accents on the board, which will tie in with all of our white theme. So this is going to be a great addition for our case as well, which is a white case. Now for the drive, we've gone for the XPG GAMMIX S70 Blade. This is a 1TB drive, super fast reads and writes on this one. And it is a Gen 4 drive. So this will give us super fast reads and write speeds. For the power supply, we've gone for the Corsair CX650F RGB power supply. This is going to be plenty of power for our computer. It's also got fully modular, which comes with some white cables, which is pretty nice. I did buy some black and white sleeve cables, but I don't think I'm going to use them. I think I'm just going to use the white cables that come with this power supply, and this should set it all off just nice. Now for the case, I did go for a white case, which you'll see a little bit later on in the video. It's a Thermaltake S100TG case with a nice glass panel on the side. So what we're going to do first is prep the motherboard. This is the motherboard we're using. As you can see here, I'm just going to get the CPU out of the clamshell here and get this installed onto the motherboard. I'm really liking the look of this motherboard. It's got plenty of white accents on it and good aluminium heat spreaders on here as well. So let's pull the retention lever back and just slot in our CPU. Now this is pretty straightforward stuff. All you need to do is line the triangle up on the CPU with the triangle on the motherboard and insert it, and then pull the retention lever back down. It's that simple. You can see it here in the corner. So all you got to do is tie that in with the triangle on the board. Now with AMD processors, they have pins on the actual bottom of the CPU. So when you're slotting this into the socket, just make sure it's nice and snug in there before you pull the retention lever back down, because you don't want to bend any pins or anything like that. It should be pretty straightforward and as easy as that. Now what we're going to do here is remove the bracket here around the CPU, and that's because we don't need this bracket on the board. So I'm going to remove this off of here so we can mount our own cooler. You'll also notice that there is no battery, no CMOS battery on this board, and this is because we've got this board from AliExpress and we've got the CPU. So we come as a bundle, CPU and motherboard, and it was a pretty good price. I'll leave all the links for that in the video description. So now we're going to remove the M.2 heat shield here to protect our drive here. But before we do that, let's just remove this bracket here on the board here, and this is because we don't need to use this bracket. So there's 4 screws here. Just keep this safe, and it does come with its own back plate here, so we'll remove this from the board. Now we've got that removed, all we need to do here is get our little screwdriver and remove the 2 screws here for the heat shield so we can get access to that M.2 slot. Now this is a pretty big chunky piece of aluminium here to keep this cool, so I'm pretty impressed with this build quality from Asrock here. Now there is a couple of screws on the back here. I went to pull this up and it didn't come off, so there is a couple of screws on the back of the board that you need to unscrew to get access to the M.2 slot. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these and put them to one side, and it should come off. Now you can see that thermal pad on here, so I'm going to leave that alone, and all we need to do here is use the M.2 slot. On the bottom you will see how big that this aluminium cooler is here. It's really nice to dissipate the heat, and I do like that design on here as well. So we can put that to one side and get our drive now. So let's go ahead and get our drive and put this into the board here. So I'm going to slot this into the board, and once we've got this in, we can put our heatsink back onto the board again. So you can see here there's a little post here that this sits on top, and there is a screw hole in here which the heatsink will screw into and hold the drive down. So let's go ahead and get that. Now there is a little piece of tape on the bottom of this heatsink which has got a thermal pad on it, and this is going to lay right on top of the actual drive itself. So let's take a closer look at this. As you can see, here's a big chunk of aluminium here, and on this side we're just going to pull this tape off here, and that has a thermal pad on here which is going to sit on top of the drive. So let's line this back up, and we can then put this back onto the board here. So it'll only go on one way, the way it come off. So I'm just going to line this up, and the screw hole should line up here. I just need to make sure I've got this lined up properly, and I've got a tripod in the way here, so it doesn't make it any easier. So I'm just lining up the screw holes so I can get this screwed in properly. And these can be a bit fiddly, especially when you've got a tripod here with a camera on it. It's not easy to see where the screw hole is. So let's go ahead and get the screws back in. So I've got to put 4 screws back in, so let's go ahead and get the first one in here. And once we get one in, it should be plain sailing from here. So let's go ahead and get that screwed down. There we go. And once we've got this on, we can then move on to the actual water pump here that we need to get onto the board. So I'm going to go ahead and screw this one down here. Now obviously we've got to put the other 2 screws in on the back, so I'll go ahead and do that as well. So I'm going to try and get the all-in-one liquid cooler on next. So I'm going to get this out of the box, and we need to mount the fans and then get the pump mounted to the motherboard. So this is what we're going to do here. So I've got the fans in the right location and rotation here. So we're just going to put these big long screws and put them through the actual fans and screw them into the radiator. So depending on whether you want push and pull, or if you've got 4 fans, you can sort this all out yourself. There's only 2 fans here, so we're going to have them in this location here so we can see the RGB inside the case, and this will be pushing air through the actual radiator out to the top of the case here. Now if you're wondering why I'm not using an electrical screwdriver here, and that's because this type of work is really sort of delicate. You don't really want to be using electrical screwdrivers on radiators because they can literally damage the radiator. So just use a hand screwdriver. It's not difficult, and these screws are only small anyway. I'm just going to line these 2 up here and put these other 2 in, and we can move on to the next stage. Okay, so let's get the pump onto the actual motherboard here on the CPU. So I'm just going to get the user manual out here. We need to use the back plate here, and the back plate is going to be on one way. So you can see these little lugs here. These need to be on the back of the board here, and it will only go in one way. And it does come with these screws here, so push these through and put them in the right location in the right holes here, and we should be able to push this through the motherboard. So I'm going to go ahead and line all these up and get them in the right place here. So we've got the screws in the back plate here. I'm going to put the foam pad on here as well, and then what we need to do is lie this flat onto the desk so we can drop the motherboard over the top of it like so. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I've now got these on, and once we get this into position here, all we need to do here now is put in the washers here. So I'm going to go ahead and push on these plastic washers to hold this into position, and that's what I'm going to do next. So let's just clip these on. They're a little bit tight, so you just have to force them down a bit. There we go. And once we've got the 4 of these on, we're ready to get to the next stage. So let's get the pump prepared here. What I need to do is put the correct bracket on, and this slots into position on the pump. The mechanism on this is really super easy. I do like the way that Thermaltake have designed this, so I'm just going to slot this into position, and we need to then pull off the bottom piece here, which is the plastic coating, and this means that we're going to have a nice clean surface here. And then what I'm going to do next is put the thermal compound on. So you can see here, this is the copper base here. Let's go ahead and get some compound to put this onto the CPU here, and then we can screw down the pump onto the board. Now whatever compound you want to use, it does come with its own compound, this kit. I'm going to use the MX5 compound from RTX. Let's go ahead and apply our thermal compound. Now the thermal compound here is quite a thick substance, so I've got a rubber glove on here so I can spread this out. I prefer to spread out the thermal compound like this on the Ryzen processors. Now you could leave it just like this and put the actual block on top of this, it would be perfectly fine, but I'm just going to smear this around on the CPU, and that way I'll get a nice even coat right across the CPU here. So let's go ahead and do this. Now there's many methods of applying thermal compound, it's not rocket science. Whatever way you want to do yours, you can use that method, but it's pretty straightforward stuff. And again, I'm just going to smear this onto the CPU here. And with this method, it means I can just throw the glove into the bin, and it just doesn't put too much paste onto the actual CPU here. So we've got a nice covering here. So let's put the water pump on now. So I'm just going to move these cables out the way, and we can now offer up the water pump on top of the screws here. So this should just sit straight on top, and then we can put a bit of pressure down on there to put our screws on, and this will hold the water pump into position. I'm going to do these finger tight first. So let's push this down. There we go, that's in position, and I can put my fingers on top of this to hold it into position here, and screw down with the 4 screws that come in the kit. Now these are like thumb screws, so I'm just going to screw all of these on finger tight first, and then use the screwdriver to tighten down. And they have an anti-over tighten mechanism on these, which will click once you've reached the bottom part of the screw, so you don't over tighten them. So let's go ahead and tighten these up a little bit with the fingers and work our way around in a diagonal fashion here. So I'm going to get my screwdriver and tighten these screws down after I've finished these off with my fingers. So let's go ahead and get these last 2 on, and then we can use the handheld screwdriver to tighten off the screws. Now again, if you're going to be using a electric screwdriver, just be very careful when tightening down here, because you don't want to overdo it with electrical screwdrivers. You can't feel the screw itself, whereas a handheld screwdriver, you can tell once it's getting really tight, and this will give you a good judgment of how tight these screws are. So I'm going to work my way around in the diagonal fashion here. Once we've done this, we can then put in our RAM into the board. So let's go ahead and get our RAM ready. And like I said, I went with the V color RAM, and this is from Taiwan by the looks of it, 16 gigabytes here. And I did like the look of this RAM when it's with this board, so that's the reason why I went with a sort of unknown brand like this. So I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the box, and we can get it installed. Now once you'll see it in the board, it does look quite nice, and it does tie in with this sort of theme that I was going for here. So let's go ahead and get this installed. So don't forget, I'll leave all the links for the parts I used in this build in a video description, and you can see the white theme on this really ties in well with all the components that I've used for this build. And this is the key part when you're building PCs, is try to find components that go well together, so it makes your PC look really nice once it's all built. So I'm just going to line these little lugs up and push these down. Just push either side, and you should hear a clicking noise, and they will be locked into position here. So choose the right slots, and we'll just click these into position, and there we go, that's the RAM inserted on the board. So now what we need to do is get all of this put inside the case. So I'm going to get the case ready, and we can then transfer all of this back into the case. Now whether you put the pump on inside the case, that's entirely up to you. I prefer to do it this way. I find it a lot easier to install the water pump and the actual 240mm rad in this sense. So I'm just checking the standoffs to make sure they're in the correct position, and if I need to add more, you can use a tool like this to tighten them down and put them into position. So they're all in position, And like I said, this is a Thermaltake case. I really was impressed with this case at this sort of price point. And if you want to see a full review of the case, let me know in the comment section below. So I've gone ahead and removed the rear fan that comes with this case because I don't want to use these type of fans. It's a 3-pin fan which works off of voltage. So I'm going to basically put some white fans in here to make it look a bit nicer. And I've also got some RGB fans as well. So we've got RGB at the top, so I'm going to put one RGB at the rear and 2 standard white fans in the front. Okay, so let's get the motherboard into the case. Now we have to hold the radiator up as well because we don't want to have that dropping down. So just have to wiggle this in. It's a bit fiddly because we do have that radiator attached. And again, once I can put this back on the bench here, there should be enough cables here to make it sit at the back here. There we go. And now we can push this in. Now this does come with its own IO shield, so I don't have to put one of those in. And I'm just going to line this up ready so we can get the screws in to hold the motherboard down. So you can see that's all tying in really nicely there now. And what I'm going to do is once I get a few screws in, we can then put the radiator up the top. So let's get a few screws in the motherboard here. Let's go ahead and get these in. There we go. And this all the screws and stuff like that come in the kit when you buy the case. This case is around about £50, so it's a pretty cheap case, but it does have a really nice look to it, and that's the reason why I went with this case. I was trying to keep the cost down too, so let's go ahead and get this all screwed down. So let's go ahead and get the radiator screwed up the top. I've already got the motherboard in now, so just going to untie all of these cables so we can poke these through at the back and come back through. And I'm going to unscrew all of these cables here so I can poke these through the back as well. And these are all whited cables, so it all looks pretty nice. It should all tie in pretty lovely. So I'm just going to hold the radiator up here and screw down from the top here. So let me just line this up and remove this dust filter here. There we go. We could just line these up, and there should be these little long holes here which we can line the radiator holes up with so we can screw it down. Now again, this is going to be a bit fiddly, so once we get a couple of screws in here to hold this up, we should be good to go. I'm going to get one screw in. I'm not going to go all the way down because I want to make sure we got all the lines lined up correctly. I'm going to get one more screw in over the other side to hold the radiator up, and then we should be pretty much good to go from there. So now we need to put in our power supply. Now remember, this is an RGB power supply, which means I want to be able to see this power supply RGB through the top of it. So I'm going to have it facing up this way. Now it's not going to hurt the power supply whether you face it up or down. You just want to make sure that if you're facing it up, there is some ventilation up the top of the case, which is going to allow air to be pulled through here. If there's no air up the top, then obviously you can't have it in this rotation here. So, and if you're also having it on the carpet, you definitely don't want to have that facing down because it's going to suck all the fluff from the carpet into the power supply. So let's go ahead and get this lined up here. And you'll see there is some ventilation in the case as well, which will allow some RGB to come through. It all makes sense a little bit later on in the build. So I've got this lined up lovely now. All I need to do is get this screwed in. Now you can see there's plenty of room down the bottom here for ventilation as well. But because this is going to be standing on the carpet, I particularly don't want the fan facing down anyway. So I'm going to put these screws in now. There's 4 of them to put in here. And once these are in, the power supply's in, we can move on to some cabling. So let's go ahead and get the rest of these screws in. So let's do some cabling now. So I've put the CPU cable in. That's already plugged in lovely. And I've already got the water pump power in there as well. And I've also got the cables poked through here so we can do some cable management later on. So I'm just going to check here and make sure everything's okay. Got the GPU cables poked through the bottom here, ready to go. And all I need to do is take care of the USB cable, the audio cable, and a bunch of other cables down the bottom of the motherboard, which is pretty straightforward stuff. Now, if you've never built a computer before, obviously you're going to have to take your time and read the manual to where these go, but it is pretty straightforward. And this is the audio cable. This will always be on this side down on the left here. got the USB there, and I'll put in the USB 3.0 cable as well. Now the front control cables here as well are at the bottom, and I need to do those as well, and I'll show you those a little bit later on. You can't really see me plugging this in because my hand's in the way, but this is what you're going to have to do if you want to get all your cabling sorted out. The good thing about this case and the motherboard here is there's only a small gap at the bottom, which doesn't have a big load of cables dangling down. I hate those big cases with a small micro ATX motherboard. A lot of people doing it, just looks really nasty. This is the best way of doing it in my opinion. If you're going to have an ATX board, then make sure you get an ATX case so it fits lovely. So these need to be plugged into the board as well. You can see here, one's for the power switch, one's for the power, and then you've got the hard drive LED light and the reset button, and these will go in a certain way, so use your manual to find out how they go in. Pretty straightforward stuff. So I've got all these cables now plugged in, and all I need to do now is continue on with the build. There's a few more bits to go. I've got the CMOS battery already in, which is a 2032 CMOS battery. I've got those plugged in here. I'm going to do the 24 pin cable here, so I'm going to plug this into the board. It's all starting to come together. There's not much more to do here now, so just a bit more fettling, and also we need to get that GPU in there as well, and a bit more cable management. So I'm going to tuck this in a little bit more here. Need to put some fans in as well, so we need a fan at the rear and 2 fans in the front. So this is going to be intake at the front, and the rear is going to be exhaust. Like I said, we're going to put 2 in the front, which are going to be just standard white fans, because there's no point having RGB here because you're not going to really see it as such, because it's got a solid plate front here and non-mesh. So let's go ahead and get that sorted out now. So we're going to be using 2 fans in the front here. These are going to be Arctic fans, so pretty good fans, and we're going to probably put 2 of them up the top area. You can put yours at the bottom. You can put 3 in the front if you wish. I'm going to put them in here. Now I'm using my left hand here and I'm right-handed, so what I'm going to do is just get this started and then get my electric screwdriver to finish this off, I think. So let's go ahead and get that sorted out right now, and then we can get these screwed in. So let's get our electric screwdriver here. I tend to use this for fans. It's a lot quicker and easier, and again it has got a clutch on it, so you can't over tighten it, and that's the beauty of an electric screwdriver like this. Make sure they've got a clutch on them if you are going to be using electric screwdrivers, and you can set it at the right setting. So I've got the both of these in the front here now, which looks nice. I'm going to put the front panel back on, and then we can put that rear fan in as well, which is going to be our exhaust fan. It is an RGB fan, so let me just clip this into position here. And you may be thinking, is there going to be enough airflow? But there should be plenty of airflow for this particular case because of the side vents down here. And it has these vents on both sides, so that should draw enough air in. Let's take a look here. I've got the front ones in here now in right position, drawing air in. I've got 2 exhaust fans at the top, and I've also got 1 exhaust fan at the rear. So let's go ahead and get the graphics card in now. Just got to slot this into position and then screw this down with 2 screws, and we can use the cables to tighten this down. And you can see it's starting to come together now. A nice white and black sort of build. I really do like the look of it so far, and it's a pretty decent PC. So I've just got to screw these 2 screws in for the graphics card here, and then we can plug in our cable, and we can then start thinking about doing a bit of cable management, and then basically turning this on for the first time, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like. So let's just sort these cables out here. They're pretty tight here. I'm just going to try to negotiate these a bit more tidier here. Just push that underneath here. These are really stiff cables, and the cables to put in this actual connector here for the graphics card is really tight. It's because they're recessed in. It's not a very good design. I'm going to poke this cable connector through here as well. So there we go. That'll be good enough for what we want here. So there is the finished product there. Looks pretty good. Just a little bit more fettling with them cables down on the bottom right there. Other than that, looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is get the windows installed on here. There's the back cable management there. Not too bad for the back of the case. You won't see none of this stuff. And I'll put the side panels on. And there we have the finished product. Looks pretty nice if you ask me. I've had this sort of set to like a blue theme a little bit, and the camera doesn't give it justice. It really does look really nice, and the overall result looks pretty good. So I'm not sure what to do with this one yet. I'll probably leave this and probably either sell it, or I will probably use it myself. Either way, it's a really nice build, and it just goes to show you what you can do with the right parts, and you can get a build looking really nice. And I think the overall finished effect does look pretty good. Now, I'm not sure if I can change that ZOTAC gaming. I'm not sure if that allows me to change that. I'll have to look into that. But all the other RGB is in sync, and it is like a nice type blue color, and it's sort of a white black theme. I do like it, and I'm debating whether to change those cables out for the white and black ones, which I've got. I'm not too sure yet. We'll have to wait and see. And again, it does need a little tiny bit of fettling with the cables, but other than that, it does look pretty good. So if you want to spend the money on a GPU, which is going to cost you a fair bit of money today, that cost me £800, that GPU alone, and it's not cheap. And I don't get this sort of stuff sent to me by companies, so I buy all this stuff myself, which means it costs me a lot of money to build PCs like this that don't really get the views that other channels get, because it's not in my niche. So if you do like this sort of content, then give it a thumbs up, and I shall see you again for another video real soon.